Jai Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parabhajakacharya Stada Satashi Srimad Svagaya Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Kota Vaishnavinda Ki Iskan Vandapachaya Stavangaya Shila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur Ki Dem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Vini Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakti Vinda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopana Shama Kundi Radha Kundi Giri Govardhan Ki Vrindavan Dham Ki Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Ganga Mayi Ki Mona Mayi Ki Tulsi Devi Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Sankirtan Yagya Ki Harinam Sankirtan Ki Prantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Samaveta Bhakta Vinda Ki Gop Premananda Glory to the Samudra Bhaktis Glory to the Samudra Bhaktis Glory to the Samudra Bhaktis Glory to Shri Shri Guru Govinda. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Forgot the chapter. I forgot what chapter it is.
Chapter
9. 9. 5.
Canto
639.
Yes.
Na etat mana tava katasu vikuntanata sampriyate durita dushtam asadhu tivram kama aturam harsha shoka bhaya ishana artam tasmin katam tava gatim vimrishami dina Naitan manastava katasu vikuntanata Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram Kamaturam hashashukka payashinartam Tasmin katam tavagatim vimishami dina Naitan manastava suvikuntanata Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tiram Kamaturam hasashoka bayashanartam Tasmin katam tavagatim vimishami dina Naitan manastava katasu vikuntanata Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Kamaturam hashashoka payashanartam.
Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartam.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina. Naitam manastava suvikuntanatha. Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram. Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartam. Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina.
Naitan manastava kathasu vikuntanatha.
Naitan manastava kathasu vikuntanatha.
Sampriyate durita dushtam asadhu tivram.
Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Kamaturam harsha shoka bhaya ishanartam.
Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartam.
Tasmin katham tava gatim vimrashami dina.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina.
Naitam manastava kathasu vikuntanatha.
Naitam manastava kathasu vikuntanatha.
Sampriyate durita dushtam asadhu tivram.
Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Kamaturam harshashoka bhayashanartham.
Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartham.
Tasmin katham tava gatim vishrami dina.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina.
Please.
Naitam manastava katastu vikuntanata.
Naitam manastava kathasu vikuntanatha.
Sampriyate durita dushtam asadu tivram.
Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartam.
Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartham.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vishwamsami dina.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina.
Naitan manastava katashu vikuntanata.
Naitam manastava kathasu vikuntanatha.
Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Sampriyate durita dushtamasadu tivram.
Kamaturam harshashoka vayashanartam.
Kamaturam hashashoka vayashanartham.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dinaha.
Tasmin katam tavagatim vimshami dina.
Na,
Na,
certainly not.
certainly not.
Etat, this.
This,
Mana,
mana,
mind.
mind.
Tava,
Tava,
your.
your.
Katasu,
Kathasu,
in transcendental topics.
in transcendental topics.
Vikuntanata,
Vikuntanatha.
O Lord of Vaikuntha, where there is no anxiety.
O Lord, Vaikuntha, where there is no anxiety.
Sampriyate
Sampriyate
is pacified or interested in.
is pacified or interested in.
Durita,
Durita,
by sinful activities.
by sinful activities.
Dushtam,
Dusham,
polluted.
polluted.
Asadu,
Asadu,
dishonest.
dishonest.
Tivram,
Tivram,
very difficult to control.
very difficult to control.
Kama aturam,
Kamaturam,
always full of different desires and lusty propensities.
always full of different desires and lusty propensities.
Harsha Shoka,
Ashoka,
sometimes by jubilation and sometimes by distress.
sometimes by jubilation and sometimes by distress.
Bhaya,
Bhaya,
and sometimes by fear.
and sometimes by fear.
Eshana,
Yeshana,
and by desiring.
and by desiring.
Artam,
Ardam,
distressed.
distress.
Tasmin,
Tasmin,
in that mental status.
in that mental status.
Katam,
Katam,
how.
how.
Tava,
Tava,
your.
your.
Gatim,
Gatim,
transcendental activities.
transcendental activities.
Vimrishami,
Vimrishami,
I shall consider and try to understand.
I shall consider and try to understand.
Dina,
Dina,
who am most fallen and poor.
who am most fallen and poor.
Translation. My dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets, where there is no anxiety, my mind is extremely sinful and lusty, being sometimes so-called happy, sometimes so-called distressed. My mind is full of lamentation and fear, and it always seeks more and more money. Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied in topics concerning you. I am therefore most fallen and poor. In such a status of life, how shall I be able to discuss your activities? Purport. Here Prahlad Maharaj represents himself as a common man, although he actually has nothing to do with this material world. Prahlad is always situated in the Vaikuntha planets of the spiritual world, but on behalf of the fallen souls, he asks how, when his mind is always disturbed by material things, he can discuss the transcendental position of the Lord. The mind becomes sinful because we are always engaged in sinful activities. Anything not connected with Krishna consciousness should be understood to be sinful. Indeed, Krishna demands in Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarvadhamam parichaja mam ekam sharanam braja aham tvam savapapibhyo mokshiyashami ma shuchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reaction, do not fear. As soon as one surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna immediately relieves one of the reactions of sinful activities. Therefore, one who is not surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord should be understood to be sinful, foolish, degraded among men, and bereft of all real knowledge because of atheistic propensities. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Namam duskritino buddha prapadyante naradama mayaya pahrita jnana asranam bhavam ashrita. Therefore, especially in this age of Kali, the mind must be cleansed, and this is possible only by the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, Cheto Darpana Majanam. In this age, the process of chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is the only method by which to cleanse the sinful mind. When the mind is completely cleansed of all sinful reactions, one can then understand his duty in the human form of life. Krishna consciousness movement is meant to educate sinful men so that they may become pious simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, Harinama Harinama Harinami Kevalam, Kaloa Nastyeva 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 Gatiranyata. To cleanse the heart so that one may become sober and wise in this age of Kali, there is no value to any method other than the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Prahlad Maharaj has confirmed this process in previous verses. Tvad Virya Gayana Mahamrita Magna Chitta. Prahlad further confirms that if one's mind is always absorbed in thought of Krishna, that very qualification will purify one and keep one purified always. To understand the Lord and His activities, one must free his mind from all contamination of the material world, and this one can achieve by simply chanting the Lord's holy name. Thus one becomes free from all material bondage. Translation again. My dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets, where there is no anxiety, my mind is extremely sinful and lusty, being sometimes so-called happy and sometimes so-called distressed. My mind is full of lamentation and fear, and it always seeks more and more money. Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied in topics concerning you. I am therefore most fallen and poor. In such a status of life, how shall I be able to discuss your activities? Om Jnana-timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksho Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Nangayati Garim Yakripatamaham Vande Shri Gunandina Taranam Nama Om Vishnu Pidaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gopani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shanyavari Hasta Chade Satarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Yesterday we were ending class on the point that Srila Prabhupada brought up in yesterday's commentary. How Lord Chaitanya, when he appeared, he taught by his own example. He gave different references of how the Lord taught by his example, but the point that Prabhupada mentioned in the purport is that Lord Chaitanya did not want to hear. He covered his ears, and he did not want to hear himself glorified, especially glorified as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he appeared specifically to assume the mentality of a devotee and to teach by that mentality what is a devotee. Of course, this is something that not only the Lord himself does, but he sometimes sends his devotees to this world. In fact, in Prahlad's prayer, he even said to the Lord that you sometimes send your devotees to this world to teach by example. Because people need to look for an example. Here, it is describing how Prahlad Maharaj is teaching by his example in this verse. Prabhupada says in the purport that he's representing himself as a common man. Although he's actually nothing to do with this material world. We should try to look deeply into that. Sometimes when we hear that, the tendency is to think, oh, he knows where he's at, but he's acting like this for our benefit. But actually, the point and the important point that has to be understood is he thinks like that. This is how he thinks. Because this is how a devotee thinks. A devotee never thinks I'm a devotee. In fact, I was remembering, when I looked at this, I was remembering a quote that I saw in Harinam Chintamani. It was a quote that I found a few weeks ago when I was speaking on a similar topic. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur is explaining, it's in the explanation of how one has to be careful not to blaspheme the devotees who dedicated their lives for propagating the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. And he was elaborating on who is an actual sadhu. What is the position of a sadhu? And he quotes, or he states, Krishna Bhakta Vyatita Nahika Sadhu Ara Ami Sadhu Bali Haya Dhamba Avatara. No one is more entitled to be called a sadhu than a devotee of Krishna. But one who says, I am a sadhu, is the personification of arrogance. Personification of arrogance is a hypocrite and a braggart, or one who tries to profit from his status as a holy man to make a living. Se bhali be ami dina Krishna eka sharan, Krishna nama yara mukhe sadhu se jana. On the other hand, one who says, I am lowly, I have no shelter other than Krishna, and on whose lips Krishna's name is always present, is the truly saintly person. Trina haite hina bhali apanaki kachane, sahishnu tarura nyaka apanake mane. He knows himself, doesn't pretend himself. He knows himself to be lower than a blade of grass and tries to be as tolerant as a tree. Nija ta amani ara sakale manada, tara mukhe Krishna nama Krishna rati prada. He asks for no respect for himself while giving honor to all others. Hearing the holy name from such a person will give you love for Krishna. This is just a quote that came to my mind when Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Of course, there's so many verses which describe the qualities and characteristics of a sadhu. We can go on and speak about that for the whole class who wanted to make that the topic. But the point that Srila Prabhupada is bringing to light and is that a devotee thinks like that. And because and that's always say, well, how can one think like that? It seems to be contradictory. How can a devotee actually think himself to be so fallen when he's the most elevated person, but he thinks himself fallen? And that's simply the natural quality of the soul. It's the natural quality of the soul. When one thinks himself a servant, he never thinks himself the master. He never thinks himself the enjoyer. He never thinks himself superior. He never thinks in any way that will come in contradiction to his service attitude to the Lord. And of course, this service attitude and this consciousness that the devotee feels genuinely within his heart purchases the Lord. And so many examples how we see how the Lord becomes purchased. You know, when Rupa and Sanatana Goswami took a straw between their teeth, they said nobody is more sinful than us. Were they just playing the part? I'm Mahaprabhu's eternal associate. I came here to play the part of a devotee. So the other, no, it just wasn't there. That's how they were thinking. That's how a devotee thinks. They took a blade of grass and said, who could be more sinful than us? When Kaviraj Goswami says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, I'm not qualified, I'm lower than a worm and stool. He's thinking like that. Imagine. When Haridas Thakur stays at a distant place and offers his obeisances because he doesn't want to come too close to the Lord, because he feels he's unqualified, he's taken birth in a low family, he shouldn't approach the Lord. What does Lord Chaitanya do? He goes where Haridas Thakur is lying prostrated on the road. He lifts him up and picks him up and holds him in his embrace. It captures him. It captures his attention. The devotee's not thinking, I want to capture the Lord's attention. Of course, the devotee does think like that. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta even says, he says that a devotee should not act in such a way that he sees Krishna, but he should act in such a way that he can be seen by Krishna. So, of course, how to be seen by Krishna? This is what Krishna looks for. We oftentimes quote the verse, Prahlad Maharaj. We're speaking about Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj tells his friends, my dear friends, O sons of demons, you can't please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even if you become an expert Brahmin, you become advanced in etiquette or vast learning, nor by austerities, nor by chastity, nor by accepting vows, nor by great sacrifices. None of these things can get Krishna's attention. The Lord is pleased only if one has unflinching love, unalloyed devotion to Him. And if there's no sincere love, everything's a show. It's a show. It's just simply, it's meant, it's not genuine. But what is really Krishna looking for is devotion. And these are the symptoms, these are the qualities of a devotee. This is how a devotee thinks. And therefore, when a devotee comes to this world and behaves in this way, we look at that devotee and we think, and we should think, wow, I'm not a devotee. It's what it should awaken it with. And when I see that, and I look in my heart thinking, well, here's Prahlad Maharaj saying, how can I possibly glorify your activities when my mind is always thinking about how to become wealthy? In fact, Prahlad Maharaj even said when Narada Muni came to Prahlad Maharaj after Lord Shiva sent Narada to Prahlad, and when Lord Shiva said, there's somebody who's better than me, you should go to Prahlad. Narada Muni came to Prahlad, and Prahlad was saying, actually, I'm not such a great devotee. The only thing I did is I just remembered the Lord when I was in difficulty. And not only that, I spent most of my time, enjoying my kingdom. This is how he was thinking. He's thinking, I'm absorbed in worldly activities as a king. He started thinking himself, how can I be a receptacle of Krishna's mercy? And he said many other things also. To what he felt was to substantiate his position as unqualified as a devotee. So when we see such exalted devotees, in fact, Prahlad Maharaj is such an exalted devotee, as we'll see, I guess it's in this chapter, that he was so exalted that even when Brahma and all the other devotees tried to pacify the Lord, only Prahlad could pacify Lord Nrsimhadev from his anger. Well, he was so dear to the Lord. He picked him up in his lap. And not only he picked him up, he began licking his body. Imagine the Lord licking the body of his devotee. He's so dear. So, when we think of how great Prahlad is, and the Lord considered Prahlad to, in fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, what is that verse? That verse which described, it's spoken about Uddhava, that you are more dear to me than Lakshmi, you're more dear to me than even my own self, you are more dear to me than Brahma. He also said this about Prahlad. You're most dear to me. My devotee is most dear. And this verse was actually in reference to Prahlad Maharaj. So dear to the Lord. Why was Prahlad so dear to the Lord? Because he displayed all the qualities of a devotee. And this captured the Lord's attention. So Prabhupada says here, Prahlad Maharaj represents himself as a common man, although he actually has nothing to do with this material world. Prahlad is always situated in the Vaikuntha planets of the spiritual world, but on behalf of the fallen souls, he asks how, when his mind is always disturbed by material things, he can discuss the transcendental position of the Lord. So this is what he says. He says that my mind is extremely sinful, lusty, sometimes so-called happy, sometimes so-called distressed. My mind is full of lamentation and fear, and it always seeks more and more money. Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied in topics concerning you. Sounds like Haridas Thakur also in his prayers in the Mahaprakash Leela, when Haridas Thakur was offering prayers to the Lord. Haridas Thakur began glorifying many other devotees and saying, how is it possible that I can see you right now, present before you? I have no qualification to see you. I have no qualification to see you because I never remember you. And then he starts listing all the devotees. Draupadi, she remembered you. And when she remembered you, you appeared before her. You gave shelter to her. When Durvasa Muni was there, she only remembered you, and you came and you took that pot that had cooked and prepared a big meal, and you ate something, and you protected her so that Durvasa Muni would not become disturbed. Prahlad uses Prahlad. Prahlad, he remembered you. When he was in great difficulty, he simply remembered you. But I never remember you. How is it that I can see you now? The devotees who remember you, you come before them, you protect them. But I don't have it. I don't remember you. This is how he thinks. When a devotee thinks like that, what is he doing? He's remembering the Lord. He's remembering. The Lord actually becomes so drawn, so captivated, so attached to the devotee who thinks like that, that he never leaves that devotee. The devotee never thinks that I've captured the Lord. He thinks I'm not qualified. And therefore, because he thinks like that, the Lord reciprocates according to the devotee's dependence and his mentality. So Prahlad is saying here, helping us to look at ourselves and saying, my mind is sinful and lusty. I'm sometimes happy. Look, if we look in our own hearts, and sometimes I see the tendency is how sometimes I become happy when I anticipate relief from distress. Isn't it? Right? When you anticipate, yeah, it's coming. It keeps me going. It makes me happy. Right? And actually, relief from distress. And Prahlad Maharaj says himself, in the material world, every materialist is endeavoring for happiness, and he's trying to mitigate his distress, and therefore he's acting accordingly. Actually, however, one cannot be happy as long as he endeavors for happiness, because as soon as he begins his endeavors for happiness, he creates all his conditions for future distress. Prahlad Maharaj he's instructing his friends. He knows the science, but he knows because, yes, this is the tendency. I'm happy and I'm looking for relief from my distress. That makes me happy. So sometimes I'm happy when I'm relief from distress, and sometimes I'm sad when I'm distressful. And when I'm distressful, I'm looking how to become happy. And how am I looking to become happy? To relieve my distress. Persons who are actually intelligent, philosophically inclined, they don't endeavor for happiness, which is available in the higher planetary systems. They know, because as far as happiness derived from sense enjoyment is concerned, it comes automatically in due course of time, just as in due course of time, distress comes. An intelligent person doesn't endeavor for that kind of happiness, or that pleasure, that worldly pleasure, that temporary pleasure, which is simply the relief from distress. He knows there's something beyond that. And when he sees that happening to him, he realizes, boy, if I could only become a devotee, if I only can just think always of Krishna's pleasure. But When we think like that, what does it do? It awakens Krishna's pleasure. This is what awakens Krishna's pleasure. And what awakens Krishna's pleasure is when the devotee is endeavoring to remember him. When a devotee is endeavoring to think of him, when a devotee is endeavoring to meditating on service to him, I have to produce something to please him. But I'm always thinking of this problem, this anxiety, this obligation, this worldly matter, these cries, these. I'm always a victim of all these things. How can I think of him in the midst of all of these things? But I have to. I have to. So when the Lord sees the devotee saying, I'm overwhelmed by worldly life, read the prayers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, where he describes himself as a fallen householder. He describes, Amar Jivan, this is my life. I'm always thinking about, I'm always happy when I see others suffering, and I'm always suffering when I see others happy. He's describing the mentality of a worldly materialist, that we sometimes become also victimized by the waves of the modes of material nature, which we still can become influenced by. The only way we can transcend the modes of material nature is by willfully and deliberately realizing our fallen condition and seeking shelter. It may come as a rare event. We may get a rare glimpse. But the more we actually realize our fallen condition, then the more it helps us to understand the need for Krishna's mercy. Yet, as much as I have a need for Krishna's mercy, Prahlad Maharaj always describes himself as, I'm not qualified for it. If we read in Srimad Bhagavatam, it's here, this is such the illustration of Prahlad Maharaj's qualities. Actually, there's 2 points from Srimad Bhagavatam I wanted to read. One point is how great a devotee as Prahlad is, and why he's such a great devotee. This is brought out in this purport, where Lord Shiva tells Narada Muni about the Lord, out of his affection for Prahlad, his most beloved devotee, had affection for Prahlad, his most beloved devotee. But then he says, but what more about this can I say in the presence of Gauri, the close friend of the goddess Lakshmi? So Lord Shiva was telling Narada Muni, when Narada Muni came to Lord Shiva looking to see if he was the recipient, the greatest recipient of Krishna's mercy, he explained why he wasn't the greatest recipient of Krishna's mercy. And then he was saying, but actually if you want to go see somebody who's a recipient of Krishna's mercy, you should go for Prahlad, see Prahlad. He said, but if I start talking about Prahlad, because he's such a great devotee, I may become ecstatic. And if I become ecstatic in the presence of my wife Parvati, she might become suspicious. And Parvati, because she's close with Lakshmi Devi, she may go tell Lakshmi Devi what I think about Prahlad. And Lakshmi Devi will get upset when she finds out that the Lord considers to be Prahlad even greater than Lakshmi. Because Lakshmi is eternally residing at Krishna's lotus feet, and Prahlad, if she hears that, she's thinking, what is this? So, in the purport, Lord Shiva says, is this I cannot say in the presence of Gauri, the close friend of the goddess Lakshmi. In the purport, it states, Narada might like to hear more about the glories of Prahlad Maharaj. But Lord Shiva is afraid to arouse the anger of his wife. If he says much more in praise of Prahlad, he will doubtlessly fall into ecstatic trance. If he then speaks too loudly, Parvati might hear what he is saying. She's a good friend of Mahalakshmi's and would not like to hear about Prahlad's being a greater devotee than the Supreme Lord's consort. If Parvati becomes annoyed, Lord Shiva, actually the point is that if Parvati hears, she'll become disturbed. If Parvati becomes annoyed, Lord Shiva worries she will react disrespectfully toward himself and Narada, and that will not be good for her. Reason dictates that a newcomer to devotional service like Prahlad could not surpass the goddess Lakshmi, who eternally resides on the chest of Lord Narayan. Yet still Prahlad received special mercy from the Lord to put him in that unlikely standing. When Brahma gave Hiranyakashipu the boons that made him the scourge of the three worlds, the Supreme Lord was concerned that his devotees not have their confidence in devotional service weakened by seeing their enemy allowed to become so powerful. To help dispel the Vaishnava's anxieties and doubts, Lord Nrsimha, right after killing Hiranyakashipu, blessed Prahlad to become greater than all other devotees, past and present, including the residents of Vaikuntha, his personal attendants, and his beloved consort, Lakshmi. With this benediction in mind, Lord Shiva has said about Prahlad, in text 75, there is a greater recipient of Krishna's mercy than your father, me, and other servants like Garuda, and even the goddess of fortune. His name is Prahlad. He is famous throughout the world as the dearmost devotee of Krishna. And in text 80, when the Lord tore apart Hiranyakashipu, I, all the demigods, and the goddess Lakshmi witnessed with our own eyes the incomparable good fortune of Prahlad. Thus, by the Lord's sweet will, Prahlad became the greatest Vaishnava, which would otherwise have been impossible. Here's another further explanation. Sometimes the personality of Godhead declares other recent devotees like Prahlad, dearer to himself than Lord Sankarshan, Mahalakshmi, and other great personalities of the eternal kingdom of Vaikuntha. Sri Krishna tells Uddhava, Na tata me priyatama atma yoni na shankara, na cha sankarshano na shir naivatma cha yata bhavan. Neither Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Sankarshana, the goddess of fortune, nor indeed my own self is as dear to me as you. Lord Narayan similarly tells Durvasa Muni, Naham atmanam ashase mad bhaktai sarubhya vinashriyam adyanti kim vapi yesham gati aham para. Without saintly persons for whom I am the only destination, I am not attracted to my own self or to my supreme consort, the goddess Shri. One reason why the Supreme Lord speaks like this is that although his eternal associates, Sankarshana, Mahalakshmi, and so on, are ever established in unswerving devotion, they underwent no tribulations to gain it. Whereas his, quote, new devotees in the material world have sacrificed all comforts and security to gain pure devotional service. For the trouble such devotees have taken, Lord Krishna is especially grateful. Besides this, the Lord wants to encourage all his devotees to surrender themselves more fully. And to accomplish this, he emphatically praises devotees like Prahlad, who have taken great risks for his satisfaction. One might ask Prahlad, how Prahlad can be greater than Brahma, Indra, and other demigods. The demigods, on one hand, are frequently able to have the audience of Lord Vishnu, which is the final perfection of all spiritual practices. Sri Prahlad, on the other hand, associates with the Lord mostly by remembering him. We will hear Prahlad say about himself in the next chapter, where he says, I have never performed any real service for the Lord like Hanuman and others. I have only remembered the Lord sometimes when my mind was troubled. Nonetheless, we should remember that Prahlad does in fact see the Lord constantly, and according to the description of Srimad Bhagavatam, Prahlad offers him incessant prayers on the planet Harivarsha. Prahlad's grandson, Bali, has also inherited from him the right to see the Lord constantly, and thus Sri Vamanadev stays with Bali in his palace. If Prahlad criticizes himself for only being able to remember the Lord and not see him directly, this is simply dissatisfaction with himself due to the humility that such a perfect Vaishnava naturally feels. despite what he says about himself. He is dearer to the Supreme Lord than even the Lord's eternal associates in Vaikuntha. In some manuscripts of Srimad Bhagavatam, the following verses inserted between texts 84 and 85, Garba sto yadyapi tvatke nopadeshena bhakti man sajatas tad api tvamcha tasmat sukham avapsyasi. Granted, the reason he became endowed with pure devotion was that you gave him certain instructions while he was still in the womb. But all the same, he was born as a pure devotee, and so you deserve to be awarded with happiness in the future. Anyways, there is an example of what makes Prahlad great. And I thought it was very nice, the point that Srila Sanatana Goswami brings out is that why is Prahlad glorified and recognized as the greatest devotee? Is to give emphasis that even somebody like Prahlad, who is a more recent devotee than his eternal associates who always reside at his lotus feet, they did not undergo the kind of difficulties. And therefore the Lord wants to recognize them. See what they did. See what they did to capture my attention. See what they did to please me. See the sacrifices they made. See their humility. See their qualities. And therefore the Lord actually in this chapter of the Bhagavatam, he declares Prahlad to be his greatest devotee. Someone would say, well, I always heard the gopis are the greatest devotees. All right? There seems to be some discrepancy. But the explanation is given here as to why the Lord made that statement. Because of the more recent devotees, of the sacrifices, he wants to, again, the Lord points out those devotees for our benefit, who are in this material world. We should look at the sacrifices Prahlad, look at the humility Prahlad had, because we are fallen. And to see how Prahlad became recognized by the Lord by the sacrifices he made in service to the Lord. Made so many personal sacrifices, underwent so much tribulation and difficulties for the sake of service of the Lord. The Lord points this out, but the devotee doesn't think, I am it. I am it. Never thinks that I'm it. He never doesn't cross his mind, or he never has even tried to suggest, if you're looking for it, it is here. Never thinks that way. So, this is, of course, what is meant to be learned from the examples of, and therefore the Lord comes himself, teaches that example. Sometimes he sends his devotees, like Prahlad, and he sends many other devotees who display these qualities of humility and understand that these qualities of humility is what will enable us to become purified from our material designations, identification, from our influence of the modes of material nature, and enable us to become fully qualified to take shelter, which was the rest of today's purport, to take shelter of the holy name of the Lord. How does one take shelter of the holy name of the Lord? Feels himself lower than the straw on the street. He's devoid of all sense of false prestige. He's ready to offer all respects to others. He's never expecting any respect for himself. In that state of mind, he can take shelter of the holy name of the Lord. This is the method of purification. This is a method of cleansing the heart. Cheto dapana majanam bhava mahadevapana. As Prabhupada said in today's purport, he said, therefore, especially in this age of Kali, the must be cleansed, mind must be cleansed, and this is possible only by chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Cheto dapana majanam. In this age, the process of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra is the only method by which to cleanse the sinful mind. When the mind is completely cleansed of all sinful reactions, one can then understand his duty in the human form of life. The Krishna consciousness movement is meant to educate sinful men so that they become pious simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. To cleanse the heart so that one may become sober and wise in this age of Kali, there is no value to any method other than the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mantra. Prahlad Maharaj has confirmed this process in previous verses. Prahlad further confirms that if one's mind is always absorbed in thought of Krishna, that very qualification will purify one and keep one purified always. So this is the emphasis that Srila Prabhupada gives to take shelter and become purified. What is it Lord Chaitanya states in the Chaitanya Charitamrita? He quotes the verse, Janadapi Sunichina Torodi Vasihishnana. And he said that one should take this verse and thread it on the garland of the holy name of the Lord and wear it around his neck for constant remembrance. This is the most important verse if one wants to chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. And he gives the example that the devotee is so tolerant like a tree that even if the tree is drying up, the tree will never complain, never ask anybody for water. He says also, I'm trying to remember those verses, somehow forgetting them, but since they're relevant, why not look them up if I have them in front of me? Chaitanya Charitamrita. I was afraid this was going to happen. I won't find it. Chaitanya Charitamrita. Anyways, he also says that the devotee never, not only if the tree is drying up, it never asks anybody for water, and it never complains. Oh, and he says the devotee never tries to avenge himself. If somebody does something to him, just like the tree never tries to avenge himself, he says the devotee never tries to avenge himself. If somebody doesn't give him something, he accepts it, and if somebody does something to him, he also accepts it. You know, and when he chants in this mood of humility, then he can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. And therefore, Lord Chaitanya himself said that one should string this verse in the thread of the holy name of the Lord and wear it around one's neck for constant remembrance. And all this was the explanation of the verse Harinam, Harinam, Harinam Eva Kevalam, Kaloa Nastiva, 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 Gatiranyata. That in this age of Kali, there is no other means for self-realization. No other way, no other way, no other way. Harinama, Harinama, Harinama. 3 times, Kaviraj Goswami says, when you want to emphasize something, you have to repeat it 3 times. Right? You don't just say it once, say it 3 times. Harinama, Harinama, Harinama. To take shelter of the holy name. And therefore Lord Chaitanya himself says, if you want to find shelter in the holy name of the Lord, then the best consciousness by which you can always chant is in this consciousness of Janadapi Sunichina, Torodive Suhishtana. So Prahlad Maharaj is one such devotee, and that is illustrated by this verse where he says, my dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets, where there is no anxiety, my mind is extremely sinful and lusty, being sometimes so-called happy, sometimes so-called distressed. My mind is full of lamentation and fear, and it always seeks more and more money. Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied in topics concerning you. I am therefore most fallen and poor in such a status of life. How shall I be able to discuss your activities? Any questions? Comments?
When we reflect on our short think of ourselves as fallen or, compare ourselves or see other devotees, how can we prevent ourselves from going
too deep into
a path of hopelessness, because that is overwhelming and can deter us from even wanting to try or thinking that this will work.
the way to become free from hopelessness? Prahlad Maharaj also said in his prayers. Let me see if I can find it. It's in this chapter. It's a very famous verse where he speaks about his debt to his spiritual master, Narada Muni. Isn't this chapter? I thought it was in this chapter. No. I thought it was in this chapter.
28.
Huh?
28.
Yes. 28. Thank you. My dear Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, because of my association with material desires, one after another, I was gradually falling into a blind well full of snakes, following the general populace. But your servant Narada Muni kindly accepted me as his disciple and instructed me how to achieve this transcendental position. Therefore, my first duty is to serve him. How could I leave his service? That is how we remain hopeful. We remain hopeful we feel hopeless that because if I have to do it on my own, I have reason to be hopeless. But if I have the mercy of a Vaishnava, I have hope. That's how a devotee lives. He lives for that dependence and for the mercy of a Vaishnava. I'm not qualified, but how can I, even though I'm not qualified, how can I have hope to have hope without your mercy? Without the mercy. The devotee feels like this about all Vaishnavas. If one takes shelter of Vaishnavas, even though I am who I am, if they kindly look at me with their glance, kindly think of me, kindly remember me, kindly offer a prayer on my behalf, if they somehow even glance at me, I have hope that Krishna will take note of my struggles. That's how to remain hopeful and not become hopeless. Without that, that's the same point Prahlad Maharaj is making here. He sounds like really like, forget it, I have no hope. But he made it very clear. Because of my association with material desires one after another, I was gradually falling into a blind well full of snakes, following the general populace, but your servant Narada Muni kindly accepted me as his disciple, instructed me how to achieve this transcendental position. Therefore, my first duty is to serve him. How could I leave his service? Does that answer your question? Yes, Krishna?
I just wanted to add that it is actually encouraging to think of yourself as fallen, because when Bhagavatam was here recently, he gave a class with a similar theme about seeking Krishna's mercy and we would be fallen. And that our qualification for Krishna's mercy, or Lord Chaitanya's mercy, is only that we are fallen. And that's a lot easier qualification to meet than that we're qualified for Krishna's mercy. So it kind of takes a load off. Feel free to approach Krishna because you're fully qualified due to your being fallen.
Yeah, and Lord Chaitanya's Patik Pava. Who could be more fallen than me? Yes. So that also gives one hope. It's another very good example. If Lord Chaitanya came to deliver the most fallen, then once though Prabhupada said, no, you're not the most anything, don't be so puffed up.
So it sounds like in the society where falling is a virtue, it becomes a source of pride because I'm the most fallen. So
It can be, especially if we flaunt it. It's one thing to think that way, it's another thing to flaunt it. You know, to flaunt one, I'm the most fallen, I'm the most fallen. Everybody should know, I'm the most fallen. And why? Because everybody's heard that the most fallen is the most qualified. So I'll make sure everybody hears that I'm the most fallen. So they'll know I'm the most qualified.
What is more important, like serving the Vaishnavas or chanting the holy names in significantly?
Chanting the holy name is serving Vaishnavas. Vaishnavas are always glorifying the holy name. Right? One has to learn the truth and beauty of the Lord's holy name by hearing the revealed scriptures from the mouths of Vaishnavas. There's no other way to taste the sweetness of Krishna's name. This is Kaviraj Goswami states in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Vaishnavas are glorifying the holy name. If you don't chant the holy name, then you're not listening to them. You're not serving their instructions. So you're also serving Vaishnavas by chanting the holy name of the Lord. They're mutually service. How does one begin? How does one make the increased endeavor to take shelter of the holy name? Is by hearing of the glories of the holy name from Vaishnavas. So when you're hearing about the glories of the holy name from the mouths of Vaishnavas, you think, oh, let me take more shelter of the holy name. Let me serve the person who's inspiring me to take shelter of the holy name by chanting the holy name with feeling. The Lord is pleased. They're inseparable.
But what if you want to chant, but Vaishnava comes to you and says...
Vaishnava comes to you and says what?
Maybe we should clean the kitchen first before chanting.
Well, we should be, when I talk about meditate on the service to the Vaishnavas, I'm specifically speaking about those whose sole purpose is to inspire within the heart of others to chant with feeling the Lord's holy names. Certainly, it's not like it's across the board that every Vaishnava is immediately that falls into that category. But I mean, your question was sort of like a loaded question. Somebody tells me, I want to chant, but he wants me to serve in the kitchen. But service is also non-different. Service is also non-different than chanting the holy name of the Lord. What is the value of chanting the holy name of the Lord, praying for service, when somebody comes and says, here's some service, and you say, no, I'm not interested. But you're praying for service, and then all of a sudden someone says, can you clean the kitchen? No. No, I'm praying for service. It stops there. And then, after I've prayed for service, I'm going to go find relief in my bunk bed.
Maybe I'm praying for different service.
But that's not praying for service. That's Lala Samahi, praying for different service. This is a stage of bhava. Praying for a particular service. Till we come to that platform, we should pray for service. And if Krishna sends somebody and says, here, some service. Oh yes, Krishna's so kind, he heard my prayers. Yeah.
Maharaj, sometimes that happens, I mean, oftentimes it happens that something unexpected will come up, then I guess we can chant while we're doing the service, and that would help us get to the right.
Yes. Yeah, I always remember the story, my godbrother Yogendra, when he was in, Prabhupada was in Brooklyn, and Prabhupada was coming out from the Brooklyn temple, and Yogendra was, Yogendra is a Purva's brother. I don't know him. Purva, our godbrother Purva, his brother. He was sweeping the sidewalk, Prabhupada, and he was chanting. And Prabhupada came out, he saw Yogendra sweeping the sidewalk and chanting. He said, ah, that is perfection. He's service and he's chanting at the same time. Yes, Shalom.
What you just said, and I just thought that was a little, as a comment, more than a question, but that mood of service, like the Brajvasis are in, like Mother Yashoda is always putting her love into the yogurt or whatever, it's the mood that we bring, that delight into our service. That's what we should aspire for when we bring service, rather than feeling like it's an obligation. The obligation makes us feel weighted. No matter what we're doing, we can do it.
Yes. Very good point. Oh, we certainly. Yeah. If we perform the service in a very, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't find the word. Hare Krishna. This happens to me sometimes. I don't know if it's old age. It's a very simple word, but it's not coming to my mind. When we do something, we really don't want to do it. What's the word? Huh? Grudging. Begrudgingly. Yes, that's a good word. Wasn't the one I was looking for, but it's good. I'll take it. In a begrudging way. It's, we're not getting any benefit. We think, who am I doing this for? And then sometimes we think, why am I always asked to do this? What's he doing? What's she doing? She should be doing more. Why am I always having? The mind just goes, it's so, plays such nasty games. Just look, nasty. If we're going to do the service, we should do it. Well, I'm given an opportunity to do some service. Let me try to please the object of that service. That's why I'm here. Sometimes devotees, I see devotees, they want very much to move into the temple, and they think, yes, I want to move in the temple, I want to be more absorbed in service. And then they come in the temple and they become too familiar with temple life, the temple devotees, and start spending most of their time thinking about, I'd rather be out there. And do whatever little they can just to get by, and thinking about how to. No, we should be hankering for the opportunity to serve. And of course, as you say, meditating on the object of service, as Mother Jasoda when she's churning the butter, the yogurt, turning the yogurt into butter, or bangles, or her clattering, her flowers are falling from her hair, her cloth is loosening, and she's singing songs about her son. She's not thinking, I have to do this again for Krishna? I'm always churning butter for him. Why did again? No, she's singing songs about her son, meditating on pleasure. Okay, we'll end here. Hare Krishna, glory to Prabhupada.